There comes a point in your life, and it's not a trivial point, it's a deeply consequential one where you are confronted with the necessity of transformation. Not the superficial kind, not the kind that's performed for applause or validation, but the kind that demands you to reorganize your very being, your habits, your posture toward the world, your willingness to bear responsibility. And here's the paradox. The moment you begin to take yourself seriously, truly seriously, the world begins to respond in ways that are at first almost unsettling. People who once dismissed you, who once remained distant or uncertain, begin to turn their attention back toward you. Not because you've chased them, not because you've pleaded for their recognition, but because you have become something that can no longer be easily ignored. You see, avoidant individuals, people who retreat, who hesitate, who refuse to engage, fully operate within a very specific framework, they rely often unconsciously on your predictability, on your availability, on your willingness to remain static while they navigate their own internal chaos. But when you change, when you truly change, you shatter that framework, and that's what we're going to explore. Because this isn't about manipulation, it's not about playing games. It's not about playing games. It's about understanding a fundamental psychological truth that growth, real growth, alters the dynamics of every relationship you have. So the question becomes, what is it about this new version of you that compels pursuit from those who once avoided you? And more importantly, are you prepared to handle what comes next? Transformation is not a cosmetic act. It is not something you do to impress an audience, to momentarily elevate your status, or to patch over the cracks in a fragile identity. Real transformation is disruptive. It is deeply unsettling because it requires you to confront the parts of yourself that are insufficient, disordered, or simply immature. And most people avoid that confrontation for as long as they possibly can. But there comes a moment, sometimes through suffering, sometimes through failure, and sometimes through quiet realization that your life is not what it could be. When avoidance is no longer an option, you are faced with a choice: remain who you are and accept the consequences, or take responsibility for your existence and begin the painful process of change. And if you choose the latter, something remarkable begins to unfold. You start small. You impose order where there was chaos. You discipline your habits. You begin to say what you mean, even when your voice shakes. You stop tolerating what you know to be wrong, especially within yourself. You aim at something meaningful, something difficult, and you commit to it, not because it's easy, but precisely because it's not. Days, and at first no one notices. That's important to understand. Transformation is not immediately recognized. In fact, in its early stages, it's often invisible. You are laying a foundation brick by brick in isolation. You are restructuring your character in ways that are not yet visible to the outside world, and this is where most people fail, because they crave immediate validation. They want applause before the work is complete. But real transformation doesn't offer that. It demands that you continue even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. And then slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things begin to change. Your posture shifts, not just physically, but psychologically. You carry yourself differently. There is less hesitation in your decisions, less apology in your presence. You are no longer negotiating your worth with every interaction. Instead, you embody it, and people notice that, not consciously, not always, but they feel it, because human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to subtle cues. We are constantly scanning each other for signals of confidence, competence, and stability. And when those signals change, when someone who was once uncertain becomes grounded, when someone who once chased begins to stand still, it disrupts expectations. To stand still, it disrupts expectations. You are no longer predictable. And that is where recognition begins. You see, people construct mental models of you. They place you into categories: reliable, needy, distant, agreeable, weak, strong. These models allow them to navigate their interactions with you efficiently. They don't have to think too much because they believe they already understand who you are. But transformation destroys those models. When you become a new version of yourself, you violate the assumptions that others have built around you, and that creates a kind of psychological tension, because now they are forced to update their perception. They are forced to look again. And looking again is the beginning of recognition. It's not admiration, not yet. It's something more fundamental. It's attention. And attention is powerful because what you attend to, you begin to value. Now, here's where it becomes particularly interesting. The individuals who once overlooked you, who once maintained distance or indifference, are often the most affected by this shift because their previous behavior was predicated on your old identity. They operated under the assumption that you would remain as you were, available, predictable, perhaps even subordinate in some subtle way, but you're not that person anymore, and that creates a discrepancy they cannot easily ignore. You are no longer reaching toward them in the same way. You are no longer organizing your behavior around their approval. Instead, your focus has shifted inward and upward toward your own development, your own goals, your own standards. And paradoxically, it is this withdrawal of unnecessary attention that amplifies your presence, because now your attention has become scarce. And scarcity, whether in economics or in human relationships, increases perceived value. But this is not a strategy. That's crucial to understand. If you attempt to manufacture this effect artificially, if you pretend to be indifferent while internally remaining dependent, it will not work. Because people are not responding to the surface level behavior, they are responding to the underlying reality, and reality cannot be faked for long. True transformation alters your internal state. It changes how you perceive yourself, how you orient yourself in the world, and what you are willing to accept. And those internal changes inevitably manifest externally in ways that others can perceive, even if they cannot articulate them. That's what forces recognition. It's not the words you say. It's not the image you project. It's the coherence between who you are and how you act. And coherence is rare. Most people are fragmented. They say one thing and do another. They want one thing but pursue something entirely different. They are divided within themselves, and that division is evident in their behavior. But when you begin to align yourself, when your actions reflect your values, when your discipline supports your goals, you become integrated, and integration is compelling. It signals strength. It signals reliability. It signals that you are someone who can be taken seriously, and people are drawn to that, whether they admit it or not. Now, this recognition is not always comfortable. In fact, it can be deeply unsettling, both for you and for those around you, because your transformation does not occur in isolation. It reverberates through your social environment. It changes the dynamics of your relationships. Some people will welcome it. They will respect it. They will adjust and grow alongside you. But others will resist it because your growth implicitly challenges their stagnation. It forces them to confront the possibility that they too could change, but have chosen not to. And that's a difficult realization to face. So instead of embracing your transformation, they may attempt to minimize it, to dismiss it, or to pull you back into your previous role. And this is where your resolve is tested, because it's one thing to change when no one is paying attention. It's another thing in tension when it disrupts the expectations of others. You will be tempted to revert, to become more agreeable, more accommodating, more like the person you used to be, because that would restore the previous equilibrium. It would make things easier, at least in the short term, but it would also undo your progress. And so you are faced once again with a choice. Do you remain aligned with your new self even when it creates tension? Or do you sacrifice that alignment for the sake of temporary comfort? If your transformation is genuine, you will choose the former, because you will have come to understand something fundamental, that your primary responsibility is not to maintain the comfort of others, but to develop yourself into someone capable of bearing the weight of existence. And that requires strength. It requires the willingness to stand alone if necessary, to endure misunderstanding, to accept that not everyone will recognize or appreciate your growth. But here's the paradox. The more you commit to that path, the more you focus on becoming rather than being seen, the more recognition you receive, not because you are seeking it, but because you have become the kind of person who naturally commands it. And that is a very different thing, because recognition that is pursued is fragile. It depends on external validation, on the approval of others, on circumstances that are largely outside your control. But recognition that is earned through transformation is stable. It is a byproduct of who you are, and that is what makes it powerful. because at that point you are no longer negotiating your value. You are embodying it. And when you embody value, the world responds, not always in the ways you expect and not always in the ways you want, but it responds nonetheless. People look again, they reconsider, they adjust their behavior. And those who once overlooked you may find themselves drawn back, compelled by something they cannot fully explain. But by then, you are no longer the person who needed their attention. You have become something else, something stronger, something more stable, something more real. And that is the true aim of transformation, not recognition, but the kind of character that makes recognition inevitable. Self-ownership is not a slogan. It's not a piece of motivational rhetoric that you repeat to make yourself feel temporarily empowered. It is a confrontation with reality at the most personal level. It is the decision, terrifying in its implications, to stop blaming, to stop deferring, and to stop fragmenting responsibility across circumstances, other people, or past experiences. It is the moment you decide that your life in its totality is yours to carry, and that's a heavy burden. Because once you accept that, truly accept it, you lose the luxury of excuse. You can no longer say, this is happening because of them, or I would be different if things had gone another way. Those statements may contain elements of truth. Life is, after all, deeply influenced by forces outside your control, but they are not useful if your aim is transformation. And self-ownership is precisely that, the adoption of a mindset that prioritizes usefulness over comfort. Now, here's where it intersects with avoidance. Avoidance, at its core, is a strategy. It's a way of managing anxiety, uncertainty, and emotional risk by retreating from engagement. It allows a person to maintain a sense of control without actually confronting the underlying issues that demand resolution. And in many ways, it's understandable. Life is complicated. Relationships are messy. The potential for rejection, failure, or loss is always present. So people avoid, they delay difficult conversations. They withdraw when things become emotionally intense. They keep one foot out the door just in case things don't work out. They construct elaborate internal justifications for why they cannot fully commit, why they cannot fully show up. And then as long as the environment allows for that avoidance, it persists. But self-ownership disrupts that environment entirely, because when you begin to take full responsibility for yourself, your emotions, your actions, your direction, you remove the very conditions that avoidance depends on. You are no longer seeking someone else to stabilize you. You are no longer unconsciously inviting inconsistency because you are afraid of standing alone. Instead, you become the source of your own order, and that changes everything. First, it changes how you perceive yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is acted upon, and you begin to see yourself as someone who sees that shift, subtle as it may seem, is profound, because it reorients your entire relationship with the world. You are no longer waiting for circumstances to align before you move, and then you deal with the consequences. That's power, not the kind of power that dominates others, but the kind that governs the self. And self-governance is the foundation of all meaningful authority. Now, when you embody that, when you truly internalize it, it becomes visible, not in a performative sense, but in the consistency of your behavior. You say what you mean, you follow through on your commitments, you do not collapse under minor pressures, you do not oscillate between extremes of engagement and withdrawal, you become stable. And stability is deeply confronting for those who rely on avoidance, because avoidance thrives in ambiguity. It thrives when the other person is uncertain, reactive, or overly accommodating. In those environments, it can operate without consequence. It can retreat and return at will without ever being forced to confront its own limitations. But when faced with someone who is grounded, who knows what they will and will not tolerate, who does not chase but also does not play games, avoidance loses its footing. It no longer has the same room to maneuver. You are not reacting to it in the way it expects. You are not pursuing when it withdraws. You are not collapsing when it distances itself. Instead, you remain consistent. You maintain your direction. You continue building your life regardless of its presence or absence. And that creates a kind of psychological pressure, because now the avoidant individual is faced with a reality they cannot easily navigate. Their usual strategies, distance, silence, ambiguity, no longer produce the same results. They do not regain control of the dynamic. They do not elicit the same responses. Instead, A are met with something unfamiliar, indifference rooted in self-sufficiency. And that is deeply unsettling because it forces a confrontation, not necessarily with you, but with themselves. They are compelled to ask, even if only subconsciously, why is this no longer working? Why is this person not responding the way they used to? And the answer, though uncomfortable, is simple. Because you have changed, you are no longer participating in the same dynamic. You are no longer reinforcing the patterns that allowed avoidance to persist. You have stepped out of the cycle. And when one person steps out of a dysfunctional pattern, the pattern itself begins to collapse. Now, this does not guarantee that the avoidant individual will transform. That's an important distinction. You do not control their growth. You do not dictate their decisions. What you do control is your own alignment. But what often happens, what frequently emerges, is a reversal of pursuit. Because human beings, despite their complexities, are drawn to clarity, strength, and stability. And when those qualities are present in someone who was previously perceived as uncertain or dependent, it creates a shift in perception. You are reevaluated. And with that reevaluated comes curiosity, attention, sometimes even desire. But again, this is not because you are trying to provoke that response. It is because you have removed the conditions that made avoidance comfortable. You have made disengagement costly, not through manipulation, but through absence of need. You see, when you need someone to behave in a certain way for you to feel okay, you are vulnerable to their inconsistency. You are, in a sense, handing them leverage. And avoidance, consciously or not, will often exploit that leverage. But when you no longer need that, when your sense of self is not contingent on their behavior, you become immune to that dynamic. You cannot be controlled in the same way. And that is where self-ownership becomes transformative, not just for you, but for the structure of your relationships. Because now engagement must be genuine. It cannot be sustained through imbalance. It cannot rely on one person overextending while the other withdraws. It must be reciprocal or it does not endure. And that standard, once established, reshapes everything. You begin to filter differently. You no longer tolerate ambiguity disguised as complexity and no longer rationalize inconsistency as mystery. You see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. And that clarity is liberating, but it is also demanding because it requires you to walk away when necessary. And friends, it requires you to walk away when necessary, to accept that not every connection can meet the standard you have set, to endure the discomfort of solitude rather than regress into dysfunction. And that is where many falter because self-ownership is not just about gaining control. It is about maintaining it, especially when it is inconvenient. But if you can do that, if you can hold that line, something remarkable happens. You become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. You choose environments, relationships, and challenges that reflect your values. And in doing so, you create a life that is coherent. And coherence, as rare as it is magnetic. It draws in those who are capable of meeting it, and it repels those who are not. And that is exactly what you want, because the aim is not to be pursued by everyone. The aim is to be recognized by the right ones, and self-ownership ensures that. It dismantles avoidance, not by force, not by persuasion, but by removing the foundation upon which it stands. It leaves no room for half measures, no space for ambiguity. It demands truth, and in that truth, everything becomes clear. You are responsible, you are capable, and you are no longer willing to abandon yourself for the sake of maintaining something that was never stable to begin with. In the end, transformation and self-ownership are not strategies to make anyone chase you. They are disciplines that make you whole. When you become grounded, responsible, and aligned, you really disrupt avoidance and command recognition. But the real victory isn't who returns, it's who you become. Because once you own yourself fully, you no longer seek validation, you embody it. And from that place, every relationship is no longer driven by need, but by strength, clarity, and truth.